The Untold History of Native Americans, Genocide, Resilience, and Reclaiming Identity. For tens of thousands of years before Europeans arrived on the shores of what is now the United States, millions of Native Americans thrived across the continent, forming sophisticated, diverse civilizations. These were not mere savage societies awaiting discovery. They were advanced in culture, governance, and innovation. Yet much of this rich history remains hidden behind sanitized stories of pilgrims, cowboys, and manifest destiny. This video uncovers the untold story, the catastrophic genocide, cultural erasure, and enduring resilience of Native peoples, whose lives and lands were forever altered with the arrival of Europeans. Human migration to the Americas began over 20,000 years ago via a land bridge called Beringia, connecting Siberia and Alaska. The earliest inhabitants, called Paleo-Indians, spread southward and eastward, adapting to diverse climates and landscapes. Evidence of their presence is found in spear points and hunting tools from Arctic tundra to South America. By around 3,500 BCE, complex societies known as mound builders emerged in eastern North America. Sites like Watson Brake in Louisiana exhibit massive earthworks predating Egyptian pyramids. By 1000 BCE, the woodland period saw advanced trade networks, agriculture, and social structures flourish. One of the most notable civilizations was the Mississippian culture, which flourished from roughly 800 CE to 1600 CE. Their city, Cahokia, near present-day St. Louis, was home to more than 20,000 people and featured enormous ceremonial mounds, wooden temples, and a complex social system rivaling the largest European cities at the time. In the Southwest, the ancestral Puebloans built intricate cliff dwellings and innovative irrigation systems to survive arid environments. Their descendants, including the Hopi and Zuni, preserved traditions thousands of years old. Further north, the Iroquois Confederacy formed one of the world's oldest participatory democracies, influencing the foundations of the United States Constitution. Trade routes linked distant tribes, facilitating the exchange of goods, ceremonies, astronomical knowledge, and agricultural techniques, painting a picture of a connected and thriving indigenous America. Columbus's voyage in 1492 began a tragic transformation. The arrival of Europeans brought diseases such as smallpox, measles, and influenza, to which Native Americans had no immunity. These invisible killers swept through populations with apocalyptic speed, sometimes wiping out up to 90% of entire communities, even before first direct contact. This great dying reshaped demographics and social networks, fracturing trade and cultural ties. Villages were emptied and entire nations were decimated. Disease was only the beginning. Colonial and later U.S. policies actively targeted Native peoples for removal and destruction. The Trail of Tears, 1831 to 1850, forcibly displaced thousands of Cherokee, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Creek, and Seminole people from their ancestral homelands to barren reservations. Starvation, exposure, and disease killed thousands along the way. The U.S. government sponsored the mass slaughter of buffalo in the late 19th century, decimating a species central to Plains tribes' survival, economically, spiritually, and culturally. Buffalo numbers plunged from roughly 30 to 60 million to near extinction, devastating Native communities dependent on them. Massacres such as Sand Creek, 1864, and Wounded Knee, 1890, stand as dark moments of violent suppression that sought to break the spirit of Native nations. By the late 1800s, the U.S. government launched a campaign to erase Native identities. Children were taken from families and sent to boarding schools, where they were systematically stripped of their languages, traditions, and beliefs. The infamous motto, "Kill the Indian, save the man," exemplified this cruel policy. Children were punished for speaking their native tongues or practicing cultural rituals. Generations suffered trauma from these enforced disconnections from their heritage. Despite overwhelming adversity, Native Americans never surrendered their spirit or sovereignty without a fight. History remembers numerous leaders and movements that fiercely resisted colonization and fought to protect their people and ways of life. One of the most famous figures is Sitting Bull, the Hunkpapa Lakota chief who led his people to a stunning victory against General Custer's forces at the Battle of Little Bighorn in 1876. This was a rare but powerful moment when Native warriors successfully defended their lands and lives against overwhelming military power. The Navajo also exemplify resilience through their experience of the Long Walk, 1864 to 1868, a forced relocation resulting in much suffering and death. Yet after years in exile, the Navajo returned and rebuilt a thriving culture that persists today. During World War II, the Navajo Code Talkers made a unique and indispensable contribution by developing unbreakable coded messages based on the Navajo language, helping the U.S. military secure victory in the Pacific Theater. Their story remains a proud part of Native American heritage, showing that indigenous peoples not only survived, but contributed significantly to national history. The 20th century saw renewed Native activism demanding respect for treaty rights, cultural preservation, and legal recognition. The American Indian Movement, AIM, founded in 1968, became a prominent voice against systemic injustice. They organized protests such as the occupation of Wounded Knee in 1973, commemorating the infamous 1890 massacre, but using it as a platform for contemporary demands like tribal sovereignty and better living conditions. In 2016, a new generation of activists rose with the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe's peaceful protests against the Dakota Access Pipeline, DAPL. This major environmental and sovereignty battle garnered international attention and support, showing that Native Americans continue to guard their sacred lands and natural resources fiercely. These events highlight a consistent thread of resistance and resilience that challenges the national narrative of Native peoples as relics of the past. The legacy of boarding schools and forced assimilation policies left deep cultural scars. But today, Native communities are engaged in powerful cultural revivals. Programs across reservations and urban Native centers emphasize teaching indigenous languages, many of which were once on the brink of extinction. Sacred ceremonies, traditional art forms, and storytelling are experiencing a renaissance, revitalizing connections to land, ancestors, and spirituality. Many tribal nations are renewing traditional governance systems, including council meetings modeled on the Iroquois Confederacy's participatory democracy, strengthening political sovereignty. This cultural resurgence is not just about the past. It empowers young Native people to embrace their identity with pride and fosters broader public understanding of Native contributions to modern society. For decades, mainstream history books framed indigenous experiences through a lens that sanitized or ignored the brutality of colonization. Terms like settlement and conflict obscure the reality of genocide, deliberate acts of violence, forced removals, and cultural extermination. This national myth-making helped justify colonial expansion and masked uncomfortable truths that challenged dominant identities and privileges. Today, greater awareness is emerging thanks to scholarship, activism, and media projects dedicated to telling Native stories in full, challenging ignorance, and demanding justice. Today, Native American activism focuses not only on cultural survival, but reclaiming land and political rights. The Land Back movement aims to return control of ancestral territories to indigenous peoples, restoring stewardship that modern governments often neglect. Legal victories have forced governments and corporations to honor broken treaties and respect tribal sovereignty, though many challenges remain. The ongoing fight for clean water, protection of sacred sites, and equitable education continues as indigenous peoples shape the future while honoring their history. Please hit the subscribe button, like this video, and share it widely. Tribal sovereignty is a fundamental concept rooted in the recognition that Native nations predate the United States and retain inherent rights to govern themselves. Despite centuries of infringement, removal, and forced assimilation, tribes continue to assert their political authority and legal status as self-governing nations. The Indian Reorganization Act of 1934, which encouraged tribal self-government after decades of forced assimilation policies. Landmark Supreme Court cases like United States versus Wheeler, 1978, affirming tribes hold unique sovereignty separate from federal or state control. The continued enforcement and recognition of treaties ensuring tribal rights to land, resources, and cultural practices. In recent decades, tribal governments have expanded roles in education, healthcare, economic development, and environmental stewardship. Examples like the Navajo Nation, the largest reservation in the U.S., show how indigenous governance blends traditional values with modern administration. However, sovereignty remains challenged by ongoing attempts to undermine tribal authority, jurisdiction, and access to ancestral lands. Native leaders and communities persist in their fight for full recognition, respect, and partnership. One of the most powerful tools for cultural survival and revival is education, both within Native communities and broadly in American society. Efforts include growing numbers of tribal colleges and universities offering programs rooted in Indigenous knowledge, language, and history. Revamping public school curricula to include accurate, respectful accounts of Native history and contributions. Moving away from Eurocentric narratives. Supporting Native youth through mentorship, scholarships, and programs that connect them to their cultural heritage and community values. On the other hand, challenges remain to overcome decades of erasure and misunderstanding. Many Native children attend public schools distant from their communities where stereotypes and misinformation prevail. Raising awareness among mainstream students about the realities of Native history is vital to fostering respect, allyship, and honest reconciliation. Chapter 13, Cultural Preservation Programs. Revitalizing language and tradition. Language is the lifeblood of culture, identity, and worldview. Over 150 native languages are spoken today in the U.S., but many are endangered. Revitalization efforts are flourishing. Immersive language camps and classes teach children and adults endangered languages like Navajo, Yidini, Bzad, Cherokee, Tsalagi, Lakota, and others. Digital projects archive and share language resources, turning traditional stories, songs, and teachings into accessible formats. Cultural festivals, art exhibitions, and ceremonies celebrate indigenous arts and spirituality, drawing participation from both Native and wider communities. This revival fosters healing from the wounds left by centuries of forced assimilation, reconnecting people to ancestral knowledge, values, and community cohesion. Indigenous peoples have long maintained deeply held relationships with the land, seeing it as a living entity intertwined with their identity, spirituality, and sustenance. Today, many tribes lead pioneering efforts in environmental protection, including forests, rivers, and wildlife conservation, sustainable land management that respects natural cycles and balances usage with preservation, opposing projects that threaten sacred sites, such as pipelines, mining, and deforestation. These efforts not only honor traditions, but also contribute critical knowledge to global ecological crises and climate change adaptation. The story of Native America is one of profound tragedy, but also of extraordinary strength and renewal. Acknowledging the true history, the genocide, resilience, loss, and revival is essential for building a society that honors justice, respect, and partnership moving forward. As we open our eyes to these truths, we can support Native communities in their journey toward healing, sovereignty, and cultural flourishing. History is not just about the past. It shapes how we treat each other today and tomorrow. If you've learned something new today or felt moved by this untold story, please hit subscribe right now to stay connected to important histories often left out of mainstream narratives. Like and share this video with friends and family to amplify Native voices and perspectives. Join the conversation by commenting below. Which part surprised you most? What questions or reflections do you have? Together, we can fight ignorance, honor resilience, and support a future where First Peoples' stories and rights are respected and celebrated. Let's keep learning, sharing, and standing with Native America. While history textbooks often focus on dates and events, Native voices bring the story to life through personal accounts that carry the pain, hope, and resilience of generations. Elders often share oral histories passed down centuries, recounting the trauma of displacement, but also the strength of community bonds. For example, Cherokee elder Wilma Mankiller, the first female principal chief of the Cherokee Nation, spoke about how her ancestors endured the Trail of Tears with courage. We carry the pain of our ancestors, but also their strength. Our survival is a testament to their endurance. Educational campaigns, including initiatives by the National Museum of the American Indian and Tribal Historic Preservation Offices, provide accurate, accessible content to schools and communities. By spreading awareness, these efforts help dismantle ignorance and build allies for Native rights and recognition. Native Americans comprise about 2% of the U.S. population, but face disproportionately high poverty rates. The U.S. Census Bureau estimates nearly 25% live below the poverty line. Health disparities persist, with Native communities experiencing higher rates of diabetes, heart disease, and mental health issues, exacerbated by limited access to healthcare. Educational attainment is improving, but still lags. However, Native college enrollment has grown due to tribal scholarships and supportive institutions. More than 500 federally recognized tribes maintain sovereign nations with distinct government systems, languages, and traditions. Yet Native communities continue to fight for clean water, protection against environmental hazards, and the return of sacred lands. Despite these challenges, many tribes are flourishing culturally, economically, and politically. The Osage Nation in Oklahoma has invested oil revenues into education, health, and cultural programs, improving community well-being. The Navajo Nation has launched renewable energy projects on their vast reservation, balancing economic development with environmental stewardship. Urban Native organizations in cities like Seattle and Albuquerque foster cultural connections and support services for Indigenous peoples away from their home territories. These successes showcase Native ingenuity and adaptability rooted in tradition and community. The story of Native Americans defies simplistic narratives of disappearance or victimhood. It is at once a chronicle of brutal loss and unspeakable resilience, a testament to human endurance, creativity, and hope. By acknowledging the full truth of this history, from thriving ancient civilizations through genocide to cultural renaissance, we honor those who came before and support those who lead today. Together, through knowledge, respect, and action, we can ensure that Native histories and futures are no longer erased, but fully celebrated as integral to the American story. If this video moved you or opened your eyes to truths you didn't know, please subscribe and ring the bell for more compelling history and stories that matter. Like and share this video to help spread awareness far and wide. Comment below about which part impacted you most, or share questions you want answered. Your engagement makes a difference in honoring Indigenous voices and building a more just, inclusive future. Thank you sincerely for watching and learning with us today.